The first time I saw her cut across my lawn, I thought it was an honest mistake. Maybe she was new to the neighborhood, maybe she didn't realize the gravel path belonged to me. But then she did it again. And again. 3 times in 1 week, same little power walk through my freshly reseeded patch of Kentucky bluegrass that I had babied for 2 months straight. I just replaced the sprinkler heads, too, chrome rotary ones that gleamed in the morning sun. So, when she strutted right through, phone in hand, purse swinging like she owned the place, I felt my teeth grind. I opened the blinds and watched her step squarely over the private property. Please use sidewalk sign I'd placed at the edge of the yard. She didn't even glance at it. Just kept going, her heeled sandals punching soft holes into the turf I'd spent every weekend grooming. That was the moment I knew. This was no accident. Her name was Karen, though I didn't know that yet. I just knew she lived 3 houses down, the one with the over-decorated porch and those fake topiary trees flanking the front door like guards. She had the kind of face that permanently looked offended by the concept of inconvenience. Always talking loud enough for the block to hear, always moving like she was in a commercial for superiority. And apparently, my yard was now part of her route to the community mailboxes at the corner. I tried the polite route first. The next morning, I stood outside trimming the edges of the lawn when she came striding across again, cutting through as if I were invisible. I smiled and said, "Hey there, mind taking the sidewalk next time? This grass is still pretty fragile." She stopped mid-stride, blinked, and tilted her sunglasses down just enough for me to see the offended spark in her eyes. "Oh, I'm just passing through," she said, like it was supposed to make sense. "It's faster this way." "I get that," I said evenly. "But it's private property. You're actually stepping on my sprinkler lines." She made a small, theatrical sigh. "Oh, for heaven's sake, it's just grass. You don't own nature." Then she waved her hand dismissively and kept walking. That was the first flicker of anger. The kind that burns slow, like a pilot light waiting for gas. I spent the rest of that day replaying the moment in my head, her tone, her dismissive hand wave, and by the evening, I'd decided to test just how entitled she really was. The next morning, I put up another sign. A bigger one. "Keep off lawn, trespassers will be reported." I even added small solar lights around it so no one could claim they didn't see it. And sure enough, at 7:42 a.m., right on schedule, there she was again. Same path, same stride, same phone call. I stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand. "Ma'am," I called out, keeping my voice calm. "Please stay off the lawn." She didn't stop this time. She actually waved at me, without looking back, and said, "Relax, I'm just walking to get my mail." It was such a bizarre mixture of arrogance and self-righteousness that I almost laughed. Almost. But instead, I went inside and looked up the neighborhood bylaws. We weren't part of an HOA, thank God, but there were still trespassing regulations under the city ordinance. I filed a quick report online, mostly symbolic, but it made me feel a bit better. Over the next week, it became a pattern. Every morning, rain or shine, she used my lawn as her shortcut. Sometimes she even had friends with her. 2 other women from her yoga group who started doing the same thing, chatting loudly while trampling across my grass like it was a public park. I started taking photos. Subtle ones, from behind the blinds. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about documentation. Then one evening, when I was checking my mail, she approached me with that smug neighborly smile that only exists in suburban power plays. "You know," she said, "you really shouldn't put those little warning signs up. They make the neighborhood look unfriendly." "Unfriendly?" I repeated. "Yes," she said sweetly. "This is a family community. People like to walk. You can't just claim every patch of land for yourself. Besides, your lawn is sloped, it's inconvenient to walk around it." "Inconvenient," I echoed again, letting the word roll off like it was foreign. "So the solution is to ignore property lines?" She crossed her arms. "You don't have to be so dramatic. Nobody's hurting anything." I glanced at the crushed sprinkler head poking from the soil near her heel. Sure, I said. Nothing at all. Her jaw tightened, just a twitch, but I saw it. She didn't like being challenged. I could almost hear the gears turning. The kind of person who always needs to win, even in meaningless neighborhood debates. So I gave her a smile that was half genuine, half surgical. You're right. It's not worth arguing over. That night, I laid out a plan. I wasn't going to yell or threaten. That's what she'd expect. Instead, I decided to let the problem solve itself through natural consequences, or maybe with a little engineering help. My backyard irrigation controller had manual zones, and the lawn sensors could be triggered remotely. I realized that if I timed the rotation of the sprinklers just right, I could create a perfectly timed shortcut deterrent. The next morning, I got up early, calibrated the sensors, and waited. Sure enough, 7:42 a.m. There she was, floral blouse, oversized sunglasses, cutting across the lawn mid-call. I hit the button on my phone. The sprinklers hissed to life in a synchronized arc, soaking her from the knees up before she could even shriek. She froze, stunned, as the water pressure ramped up. Her phone slipped from her hand into the mud. She looked at me through the window, eyes wide, mouth open, like she couldn't comprehend that nature had betrayed her. She stormed up to my porch dripping wet. You did that on purpose, she snapped. I opened the door just enough to meet her glare. Sprinklers run on a timer, I said. You should use the sidewalk next time. Her nostrils flared. This is harassment. I smiled thinly. Actually, it's called irrigation. She sputtered something about calling the police, which made me laugh out loud. Quietly, but not quietly enough. She stomped off, shoes squelching, leaving little mud prints down the sidewalk. For 2 days, she avoided the shortcut. I thought maybe she'd learned her lesson. But entitlement doesn't retreat, it regroups. On the third morning, I caught her again, this time walking along the very edge of the grass, as if that somehow made it better. When I confronted her, she gestured toward my sign. You don't own the air above the lawn, she said. I'm not even stepping on it. That's when I realized this wasn't just about property anymore. This was about principle. She was the kind of person who couldn't stand being told no. And I was the kind of person who didn't like being tested. So I decided to turn my lawn into something more memorable. Something that would teach her without crossing a legal line. It wouldn't be violent or destructive, just poetic. The plan formed slowly over the next few days, half humor, half vengeance. And when I finally started laying the groundwork, literally, I smiled to myself. Karen wanted a shortcut? She was about to get one she'd never forget. The next morning dawned quiet, the kind of spring day that feels too calm to be real. Birds chirped from the sycamore by the driveway, the dew shimmered over my freshly watered grass, and for a brief second I wondered if maybe, just maybe, Karen had finally given up. But at exactly 7:43, a shadow flicked across my living room curtains. I looked up from my coffee and there she was again, right back on the same route, stepping lightly over the damp turf like she was walking a runway. Except this time, she paused halfway across and looked right at my window. She knew I was watching. She wanted me to see it. She actually smiled, one of those smug, deliberate grins that said, "You can't stop me." I had underestimated her pettiness. That's when I realized. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore, it was a turf war, literally. So, I got to work. That afternoon, I measured every step of her route, from where she entered near my driveway to where she exited by the hedge. Her footsteps followed the same narrow diagonal strip, about 3 feet wide, which gave me the perfect target zone. I took notes like a crime scene investigator: soil density, sprinkler overlap, even the slope angle. I wasn't just defending my lawn, I was setting the stage for poetic justice. At the local hardware store, I loaded up my cart like a man with a vendetta: plastic edging strips, a few rolls of chicken wire, a bag of decorative wood mulch, and several feet of clear plastic sheeting. To anyone else, it looked like I was landscaping. In reality, I was constructing what I would later call the shortcut trap. I started by digging a shallow trench along her usual path, just deep enough for the chicken wire to sit below the surface. The trick was subtlety. It had to look perfectly normal from above. I pinned the wire down, layered it with soft soil, then spread the mulch evenly so it blended with the surrounding ground. The texture underfoot would feel solid for a few steps, until it didn't. Then came the plastic sheeting. I cut it into strips and buried them beneath the mulch where the soil dipped slightly, ensuring that when it rained, or when the sprinklers hit that zone, it would stay slick, muddy, and deceptively treacherous. To the casual walker, it would look like any other part of the yard. But one misplaced step and, well, gravity would handle the rest. By evening, the trap was ready. I stepped back, surveyed my work, and couldn't help but grin. It wasn't dangerous. No nails, no harm, just clever inconvenience. The kind of thing nature itself might have done if it shared my sense of humor. The next morning, I didn't hide behind the curtains. I stood right on my porch, arms crossed, sipping coffee like a man watching his masterpiece unfold. Right on cue, 7:42, there she came. Karen, sunglasses on, phone pressed to her ear, telling some poor soul about how unreasonable people make such a fuss over nothing. She stepped onto my lawn without hesitation, eyes flicking toward me for just a second, maybe expecting another sprinkler ambush. I didn't move. I just gave her a small nod. The first few steps went fine. Then she hit the zone. Her right heel sank unexpectedly deep, twisting slightly. She caught her balance, frowned, and took another step, right onto the slick patch. Both feet shot out from under her like a cartoon banana peel, and she landed squarely on her side with a dull splat. Her phone flew into the hedge. For a second, she didn't move. Then came the scream. Not pain, just pure shock and humiliation. I jogged down the porch steps, all concern and innocence. "Oh my God, are you okay?" I said, rushing over like a good neighbor. She was covered in wet mulch, hands coated in mud. You did this," she shouted, pointing at the ground. I blinked. "Did what?" "Karen, it rained last night. The ground's soft. You shouldn't be walking through people's lawns." She tried to stand, but her heel was stuck in the mesh. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. She finally yanked it free, stumbled back to the sidewalk, and glared at me with the fury of someone whose pride had taken the bigger fall. "This is harassment," she barked. "Gravity isn't harassment," I said calmly. "It's physics." That line nearly made her combust. She stormed off, dripping and furious, muttering about calling the city. I figured that was the end of it, but I had underestimated just how deep her entitlement ran. The next day, I got a knock on the door from a city code enforcement officer. Middle-aged guy, clipboard, polite but weary. "Morning," he said. "We had a complaint about unsafe conditions on your property." I raised an eyebrow. "Unsafe conditions?" He nodded. "A neighbor claims you intentionally created a hazard on your lawn. Something about wires and slippery surfaces." I almost laughed. "You mean my landscaping?" "Sure, come take a look." He walked the lawn with me, checking the soil, the mulch, the sprinkler layout. Everything was perfectly ordinary. I'd made sure of that. The chicken wire was buried too deep to be visible, and the plastic had already decomposed a bit from moisture. After 5 minutes, the officer closed his clipboard. "Looks fine to me," he said. "Just be careful with runoff near the sidewalk." When he left, I caught sight of Karen watching from her porch, arms crossed, phone in hand. She looked stunned that I wasn't being sighted. I gave her a friendly wave. The next week, she avoided my property again. But like every bad habit, the urge returned. I spotted her one afternoon testing the edge of the lawn with her foot, like a raccoon checking a trap. Then she started bringing her little dog, a fluffy white Pomeranian that she'd let wander across my grass while pretending she didn't notice. The first time I asked her to pick up after it, she smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, it's just a little dog. The rain will wash it away." It did not wash away. By now, the petty part of me was fully awake. So I went a step further, literal step. I installed motion-triggered sprinklers with variable pressure zones, disguised under decorative rocks. If anything over 20 pounds moved across the yard, the system would unleash a precise, arcing spray. I even named the setup in the app, Karen Defense Protocol. 2 mornings later, I watched it in action. Her dog trotted onto the grass first, nose down, tail wagging. The sprinklers activated instantly, misting a perfect cone of cold water that startled it into yelping retreat. Karen shrieked, scooped up the wet dog, and spun toward me like she'd caught me committing a felony. "Are you insane?" she shouted from the sidewalk. "You just attacked my dog." "Your dog trespassed," I said flatly. "My system's automated. It's to keep raccoons out of the garden." She was shaking with fury, dripping wet again, her hair sticking to her cheeks. "I'm going to the police this time," she yelled. I shrugged. "Okay." 2 hours later, an officer did show up, but he looked more amused than concerned. He took my statement, checked the setup, and finally said, "Ma'am, if you're stepping onto his property, that's technically trespassing. There's no crime here." She turned red. "So anyone can just spray people with water now?" The officer sighed. "If you don't want to get sprayed, don't go on his lawn." That night, I heard her ranting on the phone from her front porch, her voice slicing through the quiet like nails on glass. She was furious that nobody was taking her side. I leaned on my windowsill, sipping tea, watching her pace under the porch light. For the first time, I saw something beneath the anger, a kind of desperate need to be right, to feel powerful in a place where she clearly wasn't. Maybe that's why she did what she did next. The following morning, I woke to find my "Keep OFF Lawn" sign ripped out of the ground and thrown into the street. The mulch was scattered, my sprinkler head bent. She had retaliated. But what she didn't know was that I had installed a small motion camera tucked inside the flower bed, facing the exact spot she vandalized. When I checked the footage, there she was, plain as daylight, marching up at dawn, yanking the sign, and kicking the sprinkler in frustration. I stared at the video for a long time, half amazed, half delighted. She had just handed me proof. And I wasn't going to waste it. I spent the next day thinking about that footage. It wasn't just evidence, it was leverage. The kind of leverage that lets you play the long game without raising your voice. I could have sent it straight to the police or posted it online for some instant Reddit glory, but that would have ended the game too soon. No, I wanted her to know I had it. I wanted her to feel the slow, creeping paranoia of realizing she'd finally gone too far. That afternoon, I printed 3 stills from the footage. One showed her mid-kick, heel bent awkwardly against the sprinkler head. Another caught her face in perfect suburban fury, jaw tense, hair flying. And the third, my favorite, showed her yanking the sign like she was ripping Excalibur from stone. I slid each photo into a small plastic sleeve and tacked them neatly onto the new sign I installed at the lawn's edge. The new sign was a masterpiece of passive aggression. It read, "Smile, you're on camera again." At 7:45 the next morning, I didn't have to wait long. Through the blinds, I saw her freeze mid-stride, staring at the sign. Her face went from confusion to shock to pure rage in about 3 seconds. She actually turned a full circle, scanning the yard for cameras. Then she spotted the little black lens in the flower bed. I saw her shoulders stiffen. She backed away, lips pressed tight, and walked the long way around to the mailbox for the first time in weeks. Victory tasted better than coffee. For the next few days, things went quiet. Too quiet. No footsteps on the lawn, no barking Pomeranian, no smug smile across the fence. I thought maybe the battle was finally over. But quietness from someone like Karen isn't peace, it's plotting. And sure enough, peace lasted exactly 5 days. On the 6th morning, I woke up to the sound of digging. Not in my yard, but close, shovel against dirt, rhythmic, deliberate. I stepped outside and found her crouched by the property line, shoveling soil into a small garden bed she'd extended halfway across the dividing boundary. "Morning," I said, leaning on the fence. "What's this?" She didn't look up. "A pollinator garden," she said in a bright, fake sweet tone. "For bees and butterflies. The neighborhood association encourages it." "That's great," I said. "But that's not your property line." She gave me that smirk again. "Oh, I measured. Your fence isn't placed correctly. The lot map shows this side as shared utility space." She was bluffing. I knew the boundaries down to the inch. I'd seen the plat map when I bought the house. But the confidence in her voice almost made me doubt myself. "Mind showing me that map?" I asked. "I don't have to," she said lightly, tamping the soil with her shovel. "But I'll be planting milkweed here. Perfect for monarchs." The irony of her preaching environmental kindness while invading my space wasn't lost on me. I stepped closer. "Karen, you're trespassing again." She straightened up, her shovel like a spear. "No, I'm gardening. You can't stop me from helping the ecosystem." "Helping," I repeated. "By destroying property lines?" She glared. "Some people are so territorial. It's sad, really." I stared at her for a long moment, weighing whether this was worth a shouting match. But then I smiled. The kind of slow, deliberate smile that tends to unnerve people who expect anger. "You're right," I said. "Territory can be a funny thing." That evening, I went to my workshop. The plan came together like a puzzle clicking into place. If she wanted a garden, I'd give her one. Just not the way she expected. The next morning, I went to the nursery and bought several flats of the most pungent ground-covering flowers known to man, crown vetch. Fast-growing, invasive, nearly impossible to remove once rooted. Then I added a few seed packets of creeping thyme and pennyroyal, both harmless to humans, but utterly hated by dogs because of their strong minty scent. If she wanted to let her Pomeranian wander into my pollinator garden, it was going to have a bad time. I planted the mix right along the property line, weaving it between her new milkweed shoots like decorative accents. From her porch it looked cooperative, even friendly. But I knew how fast vetch spreads. By the end of the month, it would reclaim everything she'd touched. When she saw me planting, she strutted over, clearly pleased with herself. "Oh, so you've decided to join in? That's nice of you," she said, the smugness practically radiating. "Just adding balance," I said. "Nature likes variety." She nodded, satisfied, completely missing the trap she'd just applauded. The next week, the dynamic shifted. She stopped walking across my lawn, but started something worse: snide remarks whenever we crossed paths. Comments about people who think they're farmers in the suburbs, or how some folks can't share community space. I ignored her. I'd learned that silence unnerves narcissists more than confrontation. But then came the incident that turned this little feud into an all-out Cold War. It was a Saturday morning, bright and breezy. I was washing my truck in the driveway when I noticed the shimmer of something metallic near the lawn edge. I walked closer and froze. Someone had cut my sprinkler line. Not torn, not tripped, cleanly sliced with shears. I followed the leak to the fence line and saw a piece of the black tubing tossed onto her side of the property, half hidden behind her flower pot. I stood there in disbelief, water pooling at my feet. This wasn't pettiness anymore. This was sabotage. I took photos, time-stamped everything, then shut off the main valve. Later that day, I caught her outside pruning her garden, humming loudly. I walked over and held up a photo of the cut line on my phone. "Any idea how this happened?" I asked. She didn't even look at it. "No clue," she said. "Probably raccoons. Or bad installation." "Raccoons with pruning shears?" I said. She smirked. "Maybe you should hire better contractors." That's when I knew she was daring me to escalate. She wanted a reaction, something she could point to and say, "See? He's the problem." So I gave her the opposite. I smiled, nodded, and said, "Good idea. Thanks." The next day, I fixed the sprinkler line myself. But I didn't stop there. I installed a small metal sensor grid under the mulch where the cut had happened, a simple circuit that would trigger a quiet alert on my phone if anyone disturbed that area again. It wasn't fancy, just a few motion detectors wired through my home automation hub. That night, as I was finishing dinner, my phone buzzed. Motion detected, perimeter zone 2. I opened the app's live feed. There she was, crouched again at the property line, flashlight in hand, fiddling with something near the sprinkler tubing. I grabbed my phone, walked calmly outside, and flicked on my floodlight. The beam hit her like a spotlight on stage. She froze mid-crouch, eyes wide. "Evening," I said. "Doing some late-night gardening?" She jumped up, clutching her shovel like a guilty kid caught sneaking cookies. "I was checking for weeds," she said quickly. "At 10:45 p.m.? She looked cornered. "There's no law against being outdoors." "Nope," I said. "But there is one against tampering with someone else's irrigation." Her face strained. "You have no proof." I smiled. "Actually, I do. Say cheese." The motion camera had already captured the whole thing in crisp 4K. I held up my phone and took one more photo, her standing there, illuminated in the floodlight, mid-panic. Then I turned and walked back inside without another word. The next morning, she didn't come outside. Not once. Her car stayed in the driveway, curtains drawn. By noon, I got a text from an unknown number, "We need to talk." I almost laughed. She must have gotten my number from the neighborhood directory. I replied, "Sure. Front porch at 6. When she arrived that evening, she wore the expression of someone forced to negotiate with a rival they secretly hate. "Look," she began, "this has gone too far. I think we can resolve this like adults." "Agreed," I said, gesturing for her to sit on the porch bench. She didn't. "I'm willing to forget all this," she continued, "if you take down those cameras. They make the neighborhood uncomfortable." "I'm willing to forget all this," I replied, "if you stop trespassing, pay for the broken sprinkler, and stop vandalizing my property." Her mouth tightened. "That's not going to happen." "Then neither is my camera removal." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she leaned closer, voice low. "You think you're clever, but you're harassing me. I could have you cited for intimidation." I looked her dead in the eye. "You vandalized private property on camera. You might want to think about who's intimidating who." She stood abruptly. "You'll regret this," she said, before marching down my walkway. As the sun set, I sat on the porch, listening to the crickets and feeling a strange calm settle over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was patient. She had played her hand, and now all I had to do was wait for her next move. And something told me it was coming soon. Because people like Karen don't stop when they lose, they escalate. I didn't have to wait long for her next move. By the end of the week, the entire neighborhood knew about the man with cameras and traps. I found out at the mailbox when Mrs. Donnelly, who'd lived here since the 80s and was basically the street's gossip ambassador, pulled me aside and whispered, "Honey, you might want to talk to Karen. She's been telling folks you record everyone who walks past your house." I blinked. "Everyone?" "She says you've got microphones too," Mrs. Donnelly said in a hushed tone, glancing toward Karen's porch. I told her that sounded crazy, but you know how people talk. I did know. And in suburbia, reputation spreads faster than fertilizer. Karen wasn't just retaliating, she was trying to isolate me socially. It was clever in a small-town, Machiavellian way. If she couldn't win legally, she'd try to make me look paranoid and controlling. Fine. Let her talk. But I didn't sit still. The next evening, I hosted a small barbecue. Invited the neighbors on both sides, the couple across the street, even the retired guy who spent most days tinkering with his old Ford. I grilled burgers, poured lemonade, and made a point to keep the lawn immaculate. When someone inevitably brought up the camera thing, I laughed it off casually. "Oh, that? Just a security system. You know how delivery thieves are these days." By the end of the night, the conversation had shifted from gossip to gardening tip. My goal wasn't to convince them, it was to make her seem unreliable. And it worked. I could see the doubt forming in their eyes when they glanced between me and her house. The next morning, Karen stood on her porch glaring as 3 of those same neighbors waved at me. Her lips tightened into a flat line. I waved back slowly. That's when she snapped. The escalation came in the form of a letter. Typed, printed, and taped to my front door. Notice of nuisance. It began in bold font, as if she were a government agency. Your property features constitute an ongoing public disturbance and invasion of privacy. Failure to comply with reasonable neighborhood standards will result in civil action. I nearly spit out my coffee laughing. The signature at the bottom read, Karen L., Neighborhood Watch Coordinator. We didn't have a neighborhood watch. That evening, I took the letter, framed it, and hung it in my garage like a trophy. But under the humor, I could feel the tension building. She wasn't giving up. And if I knew her pattern, she was preparing something bigger, something performative. The answer came 3 days later. I was in my workshop when I heard voices outside, sharper, louder than usual. I stepped out and saw Karen standing on my curb with a police officer. She was waving her arms, pointing toward my house like she'd uncovered a crime scene. I walked over calmly. There he is, she said triumphantly. That's him. He's been filming me and my family without consent. The officer turned to me, polite but cautious. Sir, we've had a complaint about surveillance equipment aimed at a neighbor's property. I nodded. I have security cameras, yes. They face my yard and my driveway. You're welcome to review the footage yourself. Karen's eyes widened, clearly not expecting cooperation. He's lying, she said. He has hidden cameras in the flower beds. He admitted it. I kept my voice level. That's correct. They monitor for trespassing after multiple property violations. I can show you the video logs, including one where she's vandalizing my sprinkler system. The officer blinked. Ma'am, did you damage his property? She sputtered. He set me up. It's harassment. The officer looked between us, his expression saying he'd seen this exact suburban circus before. All right, he said finally. Unless there's evidence of illegal surveillance, this sounds like a civil matter. I'd recommend both of you keep to your own property. Karen's mouth fell open. So you're just going to let him spy on me? The officer sighed. Ma'am, he's not spying if you're on his lawn. She stood there trembling with fury, eyes glassy, voice shaking. You people never take me seriously. You'll see what happens when someone finally does something about it. Then she stormed off toward her house, slamming the door so hard her fake topiary trees wobbled. The officer gave me a weary look. Good luck, sir. Thanks, I said. I think I'll need it. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was planning something reckless. I even checked my cameras twice before going to bed. At 2:11 a.m., that paranoia proved right. My phone buzzed with a motion alert, Backyard Zone 4. I opened the feed and saw a beam of light weaving through the darkness. Someone, was sneaking behind my shed. I slipped on my jacket, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside quietly. The night air was cold, thick with dew. I followed the beam of light until it vanished behind the hedges, then flicked on my own flashlight. She froze like a deer in headlights, crouched near my fence, holding a small can of something. The label glinted just enough for me to read it, Weed Killer. Karen, I said, my voice low. Put it down. She whipped around, startled. You're insane, she hissed. You're ruining this neighborhood. By keeping you off my lawn? She raised the can defensively. This is self-defense. From grass. For a moment, she looked like she might actually spray me. Then she threw the can down and bolted toward her yard. I didn't chase her. I didn't have to. The cameras caught everything again, from her sneaking across the property line to the moment she dropped the evidence. The next morning, I filed a police report. This time, the tone was different. The responding officer reviewed the footage carefully, took my statement and said, "That's vandalism, sir. We'll talk to her." By afternoon, a patrol car was parked outside her house. I watched from my window as she stood on her porch arguing with the officer, hands flying in disbelief. I couldn't hear the words, but her body language said it all: shock, denial, and outrage melting into quiet humiliation. When the officer finally left, she disappeared inside, slamming the door once more. That should have been the end. But pride doesn't dissolve with warnings. It ferments. 2 days later, I came home from work and found something new on my front lawn. A large wooden sign staked in the ground, spray-painted in sloppy red letters. "Stop filming women and children." I just stared at it. My neighbor across the street peeked from behind her curtain. Another jogger slowed down to read it, then shook her head and walked off. Karen had escalated into public spectacle now. I didn't touch the sign. I didn't remove it. Instead, I took a photo, then another, from different angles, and then I set up a brand new camera, facing the sign itself, just to document what happened next. By evening, the sign was gone. Vanished. Probably after one of the neighbors complained about the eyesore. But by then, the damage was done. People were whispering again. So I decided to flip the narrative once and for all. That weekend, I posted a short clip to our neighborhood Facebook group. It was clean, calm, and completely factual. It showed her cutting across my lawn months ago, ignoring my requests, damaging property, and sneaking around with that can of weed killer. No commentary, no mockery, just timestamps and footage. I captioned it simply, "For anyone curious why I have cameras." The reaction was instant. The comments section lit up. Some neighbors defended her. Maybe she was having a hard day, but most were horrified. "That's vandalism," one wrote. "Why would she lie about being filmed if she was the one trespassing?" another said. Within hours, the tone of the block had changed again. Karen's curtains stayed closed all weekend. No morning walks, no porch gossip, nothing. It was as if she'd evaporated into her own embarrassment. But silence from Karen was never peace. It was plotting again. Monday morning, I woke to the sound of hammering. I stepped outside to find her installing a wooden fence, 5 feet high, right along the property line. On my side. She'd intentionally shifted the posts about 6 inches onto my land. I stood there, watching her pound nails with theatrical vigor. "Morning," I called out. She didn't look up. "Good fences make good neighbors," she said curtly. "Not when they're built on the wrong property," I replied. She ignored me. By evening, half the fence was up. She'd even painted it white to match her porch trim. The pettiness of it was almost admirable. I called a surveyor the next day. 2 days later, the results confirmed what I already knew. The fence encroached precisely 7 inches past the legal boundary. That was enough. I drafted a formal notice of encroachment, attached the survey results, and hand-delivered it to her mailbox. No threats, no insults, just calm legal documentation. She didn't respond. But that weekend, I woke up to find the fence shifted again. This time even farther onto her side, crooked and poorly aligned, like a retreating army repositioning its line after a lost battle. I thought that was it, that she'd finally exhausted her spite. But that night, just after midnight, I heard a noise outside. A dull crack. Then another. When I looked through the blinds, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Her new fence was on fire. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The flicker behind the fence could have been a reflection, a porch light, anything, but then came the smell. Sharp, chemical, unmistakable. Burning paint. I dropped my mug, grabbed the hose, and sprinted out the back door barefoot. By the time I reached the property line, the lower panels of Karen's brand new fence were crackling, orange tongues licking up the slats. The heat singed my arm hairs as I opened the valve, blasting the flames with a cold jet of water until smoke replaced the glow. When the fire was finally out, I stood there panting, soaked, staring at the blackened fence line. My pulse hammered in my ears. Someone had poured lighter fluid. I could still smell it. And given our history, there was only one person who'd benefit from a fence fire on my boundary. Right on cue, her porch light snapped on. Her front door opened and she appeared, wrapped in a robe, feigning shock so unconvincing it was almost comical. "What on earth happened?" she cried. I pointed at the charred boards. "You tell me." Her eyes widened with mock innocence. "You think I set my own fence on fire?" I took a step closer. "You mean the fence you built 6 inches onto my property?" "Yeah, I could see why you'd want to get rid of the evidence." She crossed her arms, her voice rising. "You're accusing me again? Maybe your cameras caught something this time." I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. "They did," I said. "Every angle." For the first time, a flicker of doubt passed over her face. "Then you'll see it wasn't me," she said, but her voice cracked slightly. "Good," I said. "Then we'll both sleep easier." That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the living room replaying the camera feed. To my surprise and frustration, the flames started just out of frame. I could see the fence glow, the smoke rise, but whoever lit it had approached from the side alley that my cameras didn't cover. No body, no match, no proof. By morning, the neighborhood was buzzing again. A half-burnt fence was prime gossip material. 2 houses down, I overheard someone mutter, "That guy's cursed, always some drama over there." Another whispered, "Karen said he keeps traps. Maybe something backfired." I didn't care what they thought. What bothered me was that Karen had once again managed to create chaos without leaving fingerprints. She played the victim this time perfectly. Later that day, she had a handyman out repairing the fence, shaking her head dramatically as she told him, loud enough for the whole block to hear, "Some people just can't handle boundaries." I had to hand it to her. She was good at optics, but optics could only go so far. Facts, on the other hand, were my territory. That night, I went full detective. I checked the alley route, looking for footprints, debris, anything. I found something, a half-melted plastic lighter near the base of the fence, and a faint shoe print in the ash. Women's size, narrow tread. I took photos and sent everything to the officer who'd handled the vandalism report before. 2 days later, he called me back. "We can't prove intent," he said. "Without direct footage or a witness, it's circumstantial." "So she gets away with it again?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He sighed. "Look, off the record? This woman's trouble. You're not the first complaint we've had. Keep everything documented. The minute she crosses a legal line, call us immediately." That last part stuck with me, the minute she crosses a line. Because at this point, she'd crossed every moral one. The only thing left was legal. And I had a feeling that time was coming soon. The following morning, a knock on my door woke me. A courier stood there holding an envelope. I signed for it, opened it, and felt a rush of disbelief. It was a notice of civil complaint. Filed by Karen. She was suing me for emotional distress, harassment, and property damage. I sat down at my kitchen table and read it twice. It was absurd, filled with half-truths and wild claims. She alleged that my security devices caused her to live in constant fear. She accused me of intentionally flooding her property with my sprinkler system, damaging her newly built fence, and even endangering her dog with unregulated chemical runoff. Every line dripped with the same self-righteous poison she always carried in person. But what made me laugh was that she'd actually included a dollar figure, $15,000 in damages. It was petty, vindictive, and doomed to fail, but it was a declaration of war nonetheless. That afternoon, I called my lawyer, an old friend named Nate who had a talent for quiet destruction. After a long sigh, he said, "She's bluffing. She wants to scare you into submission. But if she actually files this, we'll bury her under discovery requests." "Good," I said. "I want every lie exposed." Nate chuckled. "Just remember, never wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty, but the pig likes it." "Then I'll build a cleaner pen," I said. A week later, she served the official papers. It was real. I filed my countersuit within 48 hours. Defamation, property damage, and harassment backed by photo and video evidence. That's when things truly unraveled. Karen wasn't just mad now. She was unraveling under pressure. Her once perfect yard started to decay. Overgrown shrubs, wilted flowers, peeling paint on the fence she'd rebuilt twice already. She stopped waving at neighbors. Her friends stopped visiting. You could feel the isolation radiating from her house like heat. One evening, I caught her outside in her driveway, talking loudly on the phone, pacing back and forth. "He's obsessed with me," she shouted into the air. "He's been watching me for months. Nobody does this for grass." That last word made me laugh under my breath. Because that's exactly what started it all, grass. The court date was set for mid-June. In the meantime, I kept my yard spotless, my cameras running, and my responses calm. Every interaction became theater. If she shouted from across the street, I smiled and waved. If she parked too close to my driveway, I noted the time and took a photo. My composure was my weapon. But one night, that composure was tested harder than ever. It was a humid Thursday evening when I heard shouting outside, Karen's voice again, but this time frantic, not angry. I stepped out and saw flashing red lights reflecting off the windows. 2 fire trucks. Her car, her pristine silver Lexus, was on fire in the driveway, flames spilling from under the hood. She was screaming at the firefighters, "He did this! He did this to me!" Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, whispering. One of them saw me and muttered, "Oh boy, here we go again." I stood perfectly still, hands visible, heart pounding. I hadn't gone near her car. But I already knew what was coming. Within an hour, 2 police officers were at my door again. "Mr. Hayes," the taller one said, "your neighbor believes you may have been involved in a vehicle fire on her property." I met his gaze steadily. "You're welcome to check my security footage." We reviewed it together in my living room. At 9:17 p.m., the feed clearly showed me sitting inside watching TV, my car in the driveway untouched. At 9:19, her Lexus headlights flickered on by themselves, then smoke billowed. By 9:22, the fire had started near the hood, no one in sight. The officer nodded slowly. "Looks like an electrical issue. Probably a short." I turned to him. "So she accused me before even checking her car?" He hesitated. "We'll make a note of that." When they left, I stood in the doorway watching the smoke drift above the neighborhood. Karen was sitting on the curb now, head in her hands, her robe stained with ash. For the first time, she didn't look angry. She looked small. Broken, even. Part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the endless mornings of her striding across my lawn, the lies, the sabotage, the late-night weed killer. Sympathy didn't fit this story. Consequences did. The next morning, I found another envelope taped to my door. Inside was a handwritten note, shaky and bitter. "You'll regret ever moving here. I'll make sure of it." I took a photo of the note, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and handed it to Nate later that day. He nodded grimly. "That's intimidation. We'll file an injunction request." When Karen was served the papers, the look on her face said everything. Shock first, then fury, then something darker. The kind of realization that comes when someone finally understands they've lost control. Over the next week, she withdrew completely. No walks, no mail pickups, no porch light at night. Her fence still smelled faintly of smoke. Her yard started sprouting weeds, creeping into the space she once guarded so possessively. And then, just as suddenly as she'd entered my life, she disappeared. One morning, a moving truck pulled up to her driveway. A few men loaded furniture in silence while a single car idled behind them. I saw her emerge briefly, hair tied back, face pale, sunglasses hiding whatever was left of her pride. She didn't look in my direction. She was gone by noon. That night, the neighborhood felt different, lighter somehow. Quieter. The air didn't hum with tension anymore. Still, I wasn't celebrating yet. People like Karen don't vanish without leaving echoes, and I had a strange feeling the final echo was still coming. For the first time in months, the neighborhood slept without tension. No porch lights flicking on at midnight, no distant shouting, no petty letters taped to my door. The silence was eerie but liberating. I could finally stand on my porch with my coffee and hear nothing but wind and the hum of sprinklers. Karen's house sat dark across the street, a hollow shell with blinds drawn and grass turning brown. Her for sale sign leaned slightly forward, half hidden by weeds. I thought it was over. I thought peace had finally settled in. 3 weeks passed like that. I even caught myself forgetting to check the cameras before bed. But one humid Saturday morning, while trimming the hedge near the property line, I noticed a small, unmarked envelope shoved under my gate. No postage, just my name written in sharp, messy handwriting. I opened it expecting a flyer or a delivery notice, but inside was a single photo. It was my lawn, taken from the street, clearly at night, with a faint reflection of a car mirror in the corner. On the back, scrawled in that same handwriting, "Keep watching. I still am." The old adrenaline came roaring back. My first thought was that she hadn't really left, that she'd just moved somewhere nearby. The timing made sense. Her house hadn't sold yet, and maybe she was renting somewhere close. I immediately checked my camera logs. Nothing unusual, no motion alerts, no strange cars. Still, I added new coverage to the front perimeter, overlapping angles so nothing could slip through. Then I called Nate, my lawyer. "Could be harassment," he said after hearing me out. "She's under a restraining injunction, so even indirect contact is a violation. Keep it, document everything." I kept the envelope in a Ziploc, but that night I hardly slept. Every rustle of wind sounded like a footstep. Around midnight, I got up, made tea, and stood by the window staring at her empty house. The porch light was off, but something faint caught my eye, a tiny red glow, like the ember of a cigarette, near her back fence. It disappeared after a few seconds, but my stomach tightened. By morning, I decided to do a quiet sweep. I walked along the sidewalk, pretending to check my mailboxes, and casually glanced into her yard. It was empty, no car, no sign of life, but the grass near the fence was trampled. Someone had been there. Maybe recently. That day, I called the listing agent whose number was still posted. "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual. "I live across the street from your listing on Ridgeview Lane. Is it still vacant?" She hesitated. "Well, technically yes. The owner relocated, but the buyer hasn't closed yet." "Why do you ask?" "No reason," I said. "Just noticed some activity around the property." "Oh," she said. "Probably the owner collecting the last of her things." She mentioned coming by to pick up a few boxes. My jaw clenched. Of course she did. That night, I stayed up late watching the live feed. 10 p.m. passed. 11. Then, at 12:37, motion alert, side camera. I opened the feed instantly. A figure moved along the hedge, hooded, short, carrying something metallic. She knelt near my fence, fiddling with something, then crept toward the mailbox. I couldn't see her face, but the way she moved, the quick, twitchy steps, was unmistakable. I hit record, then quietly dialed the police non-emergency line. "This is 812 Ridgeview," I whispered. "The woman under an active injunction against me is on my property right now." By the time the patrol car turned onto the street 10 minutes later, she was gone. But the footage showed everything. Her pulling up in a borrowed sedan, her crossing onto my yard, her slipping something into my mailbox. The officers collected it, a small plastic bag with 3 dead patches of grass inside, each tagged with handwritten notes. "Nature returns what you poison." They took it seriously this time. The next afternoon, she was picked up for violating the court order. The officer told me she'd been living in a rented apartment one town over, apparently obsessing over proving I was tormenting her. They found photos of my yard, my car, even screenshots of our old Facebook group posts on her phone. I should have felt triumphant. I didn't. I just felt exhausted. Nate called that evening. "You won," he said flatly. "She'll likely get probation and mandatory therapy. Her civil suit's dead in the water." "That's it?" I asked. "That's it," he said. "You'll get your countersuit damages covered, and maybe some peace." Peace. The word felt foreign now. I spent the next few days reclaiming my routine, fixing the last sprinkler, trimming the hedge, repainting the curb. The neighborhood started smiling at me again. People who'd once avoided eye contact now waved or stopped to chat. The gossip had shifted from "that crazy feud" to "remember when?" Suburbia forgets fast when there's no drama to feed on. Then, one evening about a month later, I got a letter. Not from Karen, not from the court, but from the city. It was a notice of code inspection. Someone had reported potential environmental contamination on my property. I laughed out loud when I read it. One last ghost of her nonsense, probably filed before her arrest. But the inspection still had to happen. The officer arrived a week later, clipboard in hand, polite and curious. He tested the soil around the lawn and near the hedge line, took photos, then said, "Looks fine to me. Probably just a false report." "Let me guess," I said. "Anonymous complaint?" He smiled faintly. "Always is." When he left, I felt a strange emptiness settle in. For months, my life had revolved around this petty, ridiculous war. Every day had purpose: defend, counter, document, outtweet. Now there was only quiet. I should have been relieved, but instead I felt the strange weight of unfinished business. It wasn't vengeance I wanted anymore, it was closure. Something that said, "This story is done." So one evening, I decided to give myself that. I went into the garage, found my old toolbox, and pulled out the sign she'd ripped from my lawn months ago, the bent metal one that said "Private Property." I hammered it back into the ground at the exact same spot, perfectly straight this time. Then I added a small wooden plaque below it, hand-carved and varnished. It read, "Respect grows where boundaries hold." That became my quiet reminder. Not a threat, not a jab, just truth. 2 weeks later, I was sitting on my porch reading when a moving van pulled into Karen's old driveway again. I watched from a distance as a new couple stepped out, mid-30s, friendly smiles, kids tumbling out of the back seat chasing a soccer ball. They waved. I waved back. The man, cheerful and curious, pointed at my sign. "That's clever," he said across the fence. "We're planning to redo the whole yard. Any tips?" "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Stay on your side of the grass." He laughed, not realizing the layers behind the joke. And for the first time in a long time, I meant the smile. Over the next few months, things normalized. The new neighbors were great. Quiet, considerate, the kind of people who knocked before borrowing a ladder. The lawn thrived again. The crown vetch I'd planted along the line finally filled in, making a soft, low barrier that looked beautiful but discouraged trespassers. The cameras stayed up, but I barely checked them anymore. Then, one afternoon, as I was cleaning the garage, I found something wedged behind a storage shelf, a box I didn't recognize. It was small, dusty, with a faded shipping label from months earlier. The name on it made my stomach lurch. Karen L. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a half-used can of weed killer, an old garden trowel, and a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a note, exactly, more like a page torn from a journal. The writing was frantic, uneven. "He's pretending to be calm, but he's watching me. They all think I'm crazy. I'll prove I'm right. If I can't stop him, maybe the earth will." I stood there, the smell of old chemicals lingering from the can, the words crawling under my skin. It wasn't vindication anymore, it was pity. Whatever had driven her wasn't just entitlement. It was obsession tipping into something sadder. Maybe she'd needed control because everything else in her life was unraveling. I closed the box, taped it shut, and dropped it off at the police station as evidence of prior harassment. Then I let it go, for real this time. The summer rolled on, quiet and green. The new neighbor's kids sold lemonade at the corner. The sound of sprinklers replaced shouting. My lawn had never looked better. Sometimes I'd catch myself glancing across the street, expecting to see her standing there, phone in hand, ready with some new petty crusade. But there was only sunlight and stillness. One night, just after sunset, I sat outside with a beer, watching the solar lights blink on across the yard. The air smelled faintly of mint from the pennyroyal, and for the first time, I felt something close to contentment. My phone buzzed, a notification from the security app. Motion detected, front gate. My heart jumped, but when I checked the feed, it was just the new neighbor's kids chasing their ball that had rolled through my gate. I stepped outside, picked it up, and tossed it back over the fence. They laughed, shouted thanks, and ran off. I stood there for a while, staring at the quiet street, the sign glowing under the porch light. Maybe that was the real ending. Not a dramatic victory or courtroom showdown, but the quiet act of normal life returning. The war was over, the trap had long been sprung, and peace, fragile as it was, had finally taken root in the soil she once tried to claim. And in the soft hum of sprinklers and the whisper of evening wind, I finally heard what I'd been waiting for all along: nothing at all.